So, hello. Today we are going to talk about Zustand internals, Zustand under the hood. Before starting, a brief introduction about myself. I am Harsh Pathak, front-end internet group, loves building stuff that lives on web. So, first of all, what is Zustand? So, anybody knows about it? Yeah, it's a state management tool. But why? Just another state management tool. We have Redux, Context API, MobX. But why another? Something like Zustand. So to find this, we need to understand what are the problems with the traditional architecture of context APIs and Redux. So most of the big orgs use Redux because it is a very old. I think it was published in 2015, and there's a lot of boilerplate code to connect it with React. We used to wrap it a whole of our app in a context, and there's a complex middleware setup, and it increases the initial load of your app because of a global store. Also, bundle size is a big issue. Because of large bundle size, performance of app are drastically impacted, and there's a zombie child problem. So when there is a async operation happening, a parent gets stuck and the child gets a stale data, which causes an app to break and see a wrong data. So what's the high level architecture of Zustand? So there is, you create a store, there's a store instance, a state container, and API layers. So this looks like a very complex architecture than Redux, but it's actually simpler. There are majorly three layers. First is store creation, second is state management, and third, it is integrating it with React. So how it works? So the traditional approach for state management includes wrapping your whole of your app in a context. So every time you create a context, for example, if you have four different wrappers, so your app directly look like your code grows like this, which is ugly and difficult to maintain. And the initial, every time your app loads, first the context is made, and then your global store is created, then your app loads. So how to, so this is a traditional approach. There is a traditional context, a provider tree, and there are different components which uses this provider. And all states are propagated through React tree. So how Zesting solve this problem? Module level closures. So I think everybody know about what are closures. Anybody want to explain what are closures? A brief definition. Anybody? So closures basically what it does, it binds to the lexical scope of your environment to access the values. We will deep dive into it in the live coding session. So what are the benefits of this module level closures? You doesn't need to provide anything, reduce JS overhead, simpler testing, embedded tree shaking. Tree shaking is that you remove the unused code and your granular subscriptions are there. That you are not creating a global store, just subscribing to the slides that are needed on that page only. Oh, this is my favorite part. So when I deep dive into Zustand, this is what I found out. So it is better in performance because of the use of better data structures. So they are listeners. They are components that subscribe to a state. So to store these listeners, we need a data structure. So any dev will think we can store a ordered structure. So we will use arrays. So the problem with arrays is there can be a duplicacy. So for example, if I subscribe to a state, component A subscribe to a state, then B, and they again, A is rendered, it again subscribe to a state. So there are duplicacy. So there are multiple re-renders in the content in the whole of our page, which reduces the overall performance of the page. So where the Zustand wins. So it uses set data structure. So it just uses big O of one operations for addition and deletion uh, in comparison to the Redux because it uses array. Redux uses array because at that time it was very old and initially it was written in array and At that time, sets were not that popular. So it was a newer approach and very performant. So there are automatic manual cleanups, no duplicate listeners, better garbage collection. And the bundle size. I think everybody has seen this meme. What are the heaviest thing in the world? It are node modules. So when we compare Zustand, it has minimal size along with all the middleware and the dev tools if you include. Still, it is less than Redux, MobX, and Recoil. So let's build our old mini version of Zustand. So there is a simple function. We are going to create a mini Zustand. There are 3 counters, counter A, B, and C. These all are referencing to a single count state. We can decrement it. And there is a global count which is connected to it. And it is showing which last component touched it. And we can reset it. So I think screen is visible. So first we create a store. So for creating a store, what we are doing is here the magic happens. Like I need to show that there's a state. So what initial state does is anybody they have used any statement library, you declare an initial state. So what we are creating is there's an initial state that creates a closure with at a module level, and this state is accessible through all of our app. And there is a listener. This is set data structure we are using because we are creating our own Zustand, and there's a set function which compares it and modifies the state. We can either append the state or replace it. And there's a get state function and there's subscribe API. We export all of these functions. So we have created a store, but to use it in our app, we need to create a hook to use this app in all of our app. So we imported basic use state and use effect. There is a create store function, which we are going to create a selector, which is going to create compare the shallow copies of our states and check if there is any change. So selector function, what it will do in the initial state, you have defined a complex state and the parts you subscribe, only those parts in the selected state will be compared and will be re-rendered. So whenever the value of selector or values change, your component will re-render. So this unsubscribe function is really good. So what this subscribe function will do, it will do a cleanup. So in use effect, whenever we write a side effect, we need to, in the return statement, we need to do a cleanup function. So all of this will be handled by this create use store function. So unsubscribe, the store does subscribe. So if we come back to the create store function, what you will see, it returns as a function. So subscribe function will add a component in the listeners set and the return will delete it. So when the component unmounts, it will remove from the, and there will be no unnecessary state renders even after unmounting of the component. So after that, we will create a simple counter. So there is the initial state. We have updated a count as 0 and last updated as null. And set count function, normal function, reset. You can add more functions if you want. It's just the API that you want to use to trigger states. At that part, now we will import create store function. We will just pass our initial state and the function that we want to use and create the hook that will be used inside the app, like use counter will be used by the create store. So this will return us all the states that are present inside it, and set count and reset count function to mutate the states. So let me show you the counter A. So like any other component library, state management library, you will import 2 hooks, the function you want to change and the store that you want to access. So from the use count, we are extracting the state, we are destructuring it with count and last updated by. These are the states that we want to render on the UI. And for the buttons, we are just using the set count function, and which is a very less boilerplate code. as compared to Redux, we don't have to write dispatch, a different reducer, and other stuff. And whole our app is now able to function. And you can see our app is clean, doesn't have in any provider. So there's no JS overhead. If a initial page doesn't require any store, so nothing will be imported, which improves the overall performance of our app. So that's all from my side.